So now finally beginning our segment on East Palestine, Ohio and the train derailment. And I will respond to super chats or anybody who becomes a new member, and thank you for that after we finish this segment. Otherwise, I feel like I'm never going to get into the segment here, but thank you all for the support. So obviously had the big train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio, which it's important to recognize that this train derailment is part of a larger pattern, right? This wasn't like the first train derailment. There have been a lot of these crashes, these tragic accidents happening, and rail workers have been sounding the alarm about this forever. It's something that personally I've been following pretty closely because I'm actually considering going into, an industry like rail and trying to work up through the unions. That'd be a long-term thing, but one of my buddies is doing that right now. One of my buddies is extremely active in the rail union, extremely active in organizing. So he sees what the rail workers' workplace and work conditions are like every day. Obviously, he's a part of the rail workers, and he tells us about it. And they've been talking about this forever. They've been talking about how unsafe it is, how mismanaged it is. The rails are not taken care of. The workers are in incredibly unsafe conditions. They're underpaid. There's no safety regulations. Like I said, the companies are making billions of dollars in profit. Oh my gosh, I just watched a guy fall on his butt on the ice outside. Oh, that poor guy. Oh, sorry, buddy. I hope he's okay. Sorry, that distracted me. But the rail workers have been talking about this forever, right? They've been saying that this is incredibly mismanaged, that these shareholders in Wall Street or on the American coasts aren't even aware of what's going on the railways, right? They're not even aware of the working conditions of their workers. So for those who don't know how it works, the majority shareholders in the company, who are largely located on the coasts or on Wall Street or in London in the UK, they are the primary owners of the businesses, right? So if you own a huge amount of shares in that business, you can be on the board of directors or vote for the board of directors, and you have a large say in how the company operates. So what these shareholders have been doing is just cutting production costs, because they don't see the workplace. They don't see the everyday labor process of these workers, of the rail unions. All they see is their bottom line. All they see is their profit. And the more that they pay for, things that increase safety, the more that they pay for production costs that are going to keep the rails, functioning without derailments and constant crises, the less profit they're going to make, right? Because then they're going to be spending more money on production. So they've just cut production and their profits have skyrocketed. And they've suppressed the wages of the workers, suppressed the benefits of the workers, to the point where it's now hitting a boiling point, right? To the point where we're having all these crises, especially this one in East Palestine, Ohio, which leaked a bunch of toxic chemicals into the water supply. And instead of responding by helping, the government responded by basically fencing the area off and not letting any journalists in. So now it's become a huge national issue. And what does Donald Trump do as he's starting off his 2024 campaign? He goes and he brings aid, or he goes and he brings Big Macs or whatever, and he starts handing out supplies to people and makes a big media spectacle out of it. And you know where Joe Biden is while Donald Trump is doing all of this? Well, where else would Joe Biden be? Some might think that he would go to East Palestine, Ohio, to make sure his constituents are okay, to make sure that the people he's in charge of taking care of are okay and hand out aid. But instead, he went to his real constituency. He went to Kiev, Ukraine, and pledged a whole bunch of cash and weapons, not for the victims of the chemical spill, not for the people experiencing health issues because of this train derailment, not for the rail workers who have been exploited and had all their safety regulations thrown out. No, but for the U.S. puppet government in Ukraine waging a proxy war against Russia. Has there ever been a national news story or a national incident that is more that better shows, I can't think of the word, that better exemplifies the Democrats and Joe Biden's priorities than this. Right? There are people who have gastrointestinal bleeding. There are people suffering serious health issues because they drank water that was contaminated by this train derailment. And Biden's first action when this happens is to go to Kiev and promise more weapons and more money, right? As people are criticizing the government's lack of response to the train derailment and their, inability to send relief workers, disaster relief workers, which is surely leading to more harmful effects on the people. So, it shows, it exemplifies Biden's priorities, the government's priorities, and it exemplifies really in the Marxist sense better than anything that our government is a dictatorship of capital. It is a dictatorship of capital that works by and for the capitalist class and suppresses the working class. Right? In East Palestine, Ohio, where this train derailed, the working class is suffering. The working masses are suffering. Regular people in the United States, the country that Joe Biden is supposed to be the president of, are suffering. They're experiencing health issues as a result of this accident and as a result of the government's lack of response and their inefficiency in responding. Right? The capitalists, the shareholders on Wall Street who own these companies that caused the train derailment to happen, right? The shareholders who pay for Biden's campaigns through donations and political bribery and super PACs, they want to wage a proxy war against Russia, right? They want to stop these Eastern powers, China and Russia, from rising to prominence anymore economically and challenging the dominance of Western corporations, right? So when an accident happens, a disaster happens, and the working class is suffering, Biden can't even hide his disdain for the working people and, his preference for the corporate America. He goes right to Kiev, Ukraine. Oh, well, those working people will be all right. They've been suffering for a long time. They'll be fine. What's a little more suffering? We got to send more weapons to Ukraine. We got to wage this proxy war against Russia. They're threatening our geopolitical dominance. So everyone is seeing this. This is clear for everyone to see. I was talking about this with someone who's apolitical yesterday. I was just explaining what was going on. They could hardly understand it, but I'm like, our government works for the capitalist class, not the working class. That's all you need to know, right? That's all you need to understand this. So to pull up a couple of videos here so that people know what's going on, this was a video that went fairly viral of someone in East Ohio who drank contaminated water and suffered gastrointestinal bleeding. They made coffee in the morning before they heard that the water was contaminated. And they suffered a lot of health effects.
So talk to me about when did you first start noticing anything in terms of your own health, anyone in your family?
The controlled release began on February 6th, which was Monday. It was towards the end of the day, probably, I think it was like between 4 and 5 o'clock is when they initially started doing it. I was outside having my coffee, like I do every night after dinner. And I didn't notice a smell in the air, and I didn't even expect to smell anything being 15 miles away. But I did notice that my coffee tasted unusually bitter. A little bit later, I was back out on my porch, and the coffee still tasting bitter. And then I noticed my lips started feeling numb. The roof of my mouth started feeling numb. My tongue started burning, and my throat started burning.
Wow.
At that point, I went in the house and I got my husband and I said, come out here and smell the air. I said, because I think it smells funny. I could smell a burning smell. He took a big breath in. He said, yeah, I smell something out there. He said it smelled like burning electronics. And then this proceeded 2, maybe 3 more times throughout the night. I would go out, experience the symptoms, come back in, and they would dissipate. And I didn't think anything of it. I'm like, because it wasn't sticking once I went back in the house, like the symptoms would just dissipate. And at that point, I had like, my tongue just was fried by the time I woke up the next morning. It felt like I had been scalded because as I talked to you in our communication prior to right now, I did experience the gastrointestinal bleeding, which I believe was because of the coffee that was like oddly bitter.
So there you have it. I'm sure the gastrointestinal bleeding was from the bitter coffee that was completely contaminated with chemicals from the train crash. I like the comment that says, "This is terrifying." That's the first thing I thought, because there was water contamination in my town this year, right? There was like a sewage pipe that leaked or something, and they didn't tell us to stop drinking the water until after I had made my coffee and, had a glass of water that I do every morning. Right. So it's like, what if it was, what if it was toxic chemicals that would have caused gastrointestinal bleeding or could have even killed me? This could happen to anyone. This could happen to anyone. We're Midwestern Marks. Ohio is part of the Midwest. It's not that many miles away from us. I've been to Ohio a couple times this year already. So this could happen to anyone, and this is the effect of infrastructure deteriorating, right? And our productive base decaying here in the imperial core, which is something Lenin talks about in his book, Imperialism. There's a chapter called The Decay of Imperialism. It talks about how if you just outsource everyone's jobs, and if you're just spending all your country's resources doing imperialism abroad, like Biden being in Ukraine, pledging them more weapons and money, then your infrastructure and your productive base at home is going to deteriorate and the working mass are going to suffer. That is exactly what we're seeing right now. Exactly what we're seeing. And somebody said also, nobody's really covering this right now, which is absolutely something we're going to talk about later, and something that's very true in the West. But first, I just want to show y'all a video of what this woman drank. I mean, honestly, I'm sure a lot of y'all have seen this video already because it went quite viral. But the woman who told us she drank this contaminated water in her coffee and got gastrointestinal bleeding, this is what she was drinking.
Wow.
Look at all that.
Look at it.
It's all in the bottom of the creek bed. Now look at it.
That is nasty. That is nasty. It's just filled with chemicals. It's just filled with pollutants. Oh, it's so gross. There were also people who were taking day-by-day videos. And other symptoms of the water contamination. And this, notice how none of this is being reported by the news, right? None of this is being reported by the news. It's all being reported by people on TikTok. Right? This issue wouldn't have even blown up if it wasn't for a bunch of TikTok videos that came out about it. Now CBS News is doing a recap, now that it's a national issue and they're kind of being forced to talk about it. But someone said in the comments earlier, a lot of this stuff is being covered up or swept under the rug by the media. And here's an example. I keep seeing TikTok videos and Twitter videos from people around Ohio showing the rainwater, which also looks like it's contaminated, which looks like it's got chemicals in it. And I've seen repeated examples of these videos. Now, is it possible that people are just claiming acid rain because they know this is a hot button issue? And that, a TikTok claiming that they're experiencing acid rain could go viral? For sure. That's absolutely a possibility. But every article that I've seen about it has been something like this. There's claims of acid rain from the toxic train derailment, but there are reasons to be skeptical, right? As they keep saying with everything, there are reasons to be skeptical that people are actually being poisoned. There's reason to be skeptical that the waterways are actually contaminated. Why? I just saw 3 videos of it, and the media wasn't covering it. You were trying to not let journalists in. The government was trying to not let any journalists in. And then all these TikTok videos and Twitter videos started leaking of what the water looked like. So again, we see a total failure of the US media, which, similar to the government, is nothing but a propaganda arm of the ruling class, of the finance capitalists who control our politicians like Joe Biden and are choosing to wage a proxy war in Ukraine rather than take care of the working people here at home. So I don't know for sure what the deal is with the acid rain. I just think it's interesting that all the major media outlets are saying, don't believe these TikTok and Twitter videos, despite the fact that TikTok and Twitter videos have been, the main reporting that we've gotten about this thing. Because the corporate media doesn't care, and then the government's trying to, at least was trying to keep it as hush-hush as possible. Clearly, that's not going to work because this is such an absurd issue. And, especially the fact that Biden is in Kiev right now. But it's crazy. It's crazy. Another media failure. So now, as we said earlier, before the segment started, the rail workers unions are calling for nationalization of the railroads. They are calling for the railroads to become publicly owned. They're calling for the government to seize the railroads from these corporate shareholders, these people on Wall Street who have no idea, what working in rail is even like, who have just cut production costs, cut safety regulations, cut workers' benefits, cut wages, and have just seen their profits spike, millions and millions of dollars paid out in shareholder dividends each quarter from these railroad companies as their workers suffer and as the rails deteriorate, causing all these crashes. So the workers have now gotten to a boiling point or a breaking point where they're like, we want nationalization of the rail. We want the government to seize the rail industry for us from these shareholders because of the horrible mismanagement and exploitation that they've done. And this is just a huge step. This is a huge step in the class struggle in the U.S. The fact that the unions and the organized workers at the base of the economy in an industry as vitally important to the rest of the economy as rail is, are calling for nationalization, right? Are not just calling for better wages, better benefits. They're saying, no, this whole industry is garbage when it's run by these Wall Street shareholders. It needs to be owned and controlled by the people. And the surplus of this industry shouldn't go into the dividends of shareholders. It should be reinvested in the industry and the workers themselves, or spent on like government welfare programs like healthcare. That is what nationalization represents. It represents public ownership instead of private ownership. And now that is what the working mass in the U.S. is calling for, as the contradictions of capitalism and imperialism are coming to a boiling point, as they're coming to a head. Right? All the workers can see that Biden's in Kiev, Ukraine, handing them our tax dollars and more weapons while people are suffering in the U.S. and Biden refuses to do much of anything. So this is a huge step. And we wrote an endorsement for the Rail Workers Union, which Carlos shared earlier. And check that out, please, on the Midwestern Marks Twitter. Share it, like it, send it, do whatever, because that's, we are very excited to have actually be building a relationship with workers who are actually calling for nationalization of the industry in a major, super important U.S. industry, like I said. So yeah, solidarity to those workers. Shout out to them, and I hope people can stay focused on what's important here, which is the workers, and and using this event to show people the contradictions of capitalism and the contradictions of imperialism, and get people to organize and call for nationalization like that. Now, do I think the government and Biden will nationalize the rail industry? Of course not. The government is a dictatorship of capital. Now, if the rail workers said, you know what, even though Biden said we're not allowed to strike, and for those who don't know, Biden said the rail workers can't strike. We're making it illegal for them to strike because it's such an important industry and the entire economy would shut down if they did, right? So therefore they can't. We're enforcing this as the government. Perfect example of how the government works as a dictatorship of capital, a tool of suppression for the capitalist class, the railroad companies. to suppress the rail workers and prevent them from engaging in struggle that would better their lives. Biden. Okay, so Biden prevented them from striking. But hypothetically, theoretically, if the rail workers were organized and militant enough to say, you know what, Biden, we don't care if you made it illegal. We're going on strike anyways, unless you nationalize the rail industry, then they might have the power, right? Then they might, have the ability to threaten Biden and get him to actually nationalize rail, because rail is such an important industry. Like, think about it. Think how many goods are transported by rail that affect every different industry in the United States, right? Including things like coal that fuel other industries that are absolutely necessary for other industries to function. The entire U.S. economy would shut down if the rail workers went on strike, which is why Biden told them they can't strike. Right. And this shows the power that workers have, especially industrial workers at the base of the economy. They have the power, if they're militant and organized enough, to threaten to shut everything down unless their demands are met. Now, I don't think, and this is based on my buddy, who, like I said, is very active in the rail union and is a rail worker, a very militant rail worker. I don't think the rail industry, the working class rail workers, have enough organization and militancy right now in order to do something like that. Right. I don't think they have, I think they would be very worried about losing their jobs. They would be very worried about losing their wages for that period of time that they were on strike. They're worried about losing their livelihood. So there needs to be more organization and militancy and education on the ground in the rail industry in order to seize an opportunity like this, take an opportunity like this and say, guess what? You're going to nationalize rail. Otherwise, we're threatening strike, right? Because that's what you need to do. Like I said, the government and Biden, they are a dictatorship of the capitalist class. So if you just ask them to nationalize rail, they are going to say no, because that goes against the interests of the capitalist class who they serve. But if you threaten the dictatorship of capital, if the workers threaten to withhold their labor because they're organized enough to do so, and they have a strike fund set aside big enough to do so and help their workers survive while they're on strike, then you can threaten the government and make demands, which is how it has to work, right? But I don't know if we have enough education of the working class to the point where they know that yet, that they're going to have to, threaten to withhold their labor, or, make threats in order to get their demands met. Perhaps they do. Perhaps they know they won't be able to ask the government for anything. But I don't know if they have the strategy and the path and, like I said, the level of organization to go that direction right now. So I don't think it'll end up happening. But, it's still a huge step in the right direction. Like I said, it's a huge step in the right direction for the country. It's a huge step in the right direction for the class struggle. It's a huge step in the right direction for the rail workers. And it's a huge step in the right direction for Midwestern Marx, because we've, gotten in contact with the rail unions and we're helping them argue for this. We're helping, we endorsed their statement calling for nationalization because they asked us to. So, lots of great things happening in response to this horrific thing happening. Right, this horrific contradiction of capitalism causing all these ill effects on the working mass is causing the working mass to get organized and get militant, which is, of course, what we need more of. And like I said, I hope everybody can stay focused on that, stay focused on the class struggle and what matters, and not get caught up in this political partisanship. Because, yeah, like I said, Biden's in Ukraine, so Trump went to Ohio and handed a bunch of stuff out. Clearly a PR move. Does this mean Biden's going to get in office and nationalize rail? Does this mean Trump will get elected and nationalize rail? Almost surely not, right? There's almost no way. Maybe he will call for that, which would be insane. But I highly doubt it, because ultimately, as a politician, he acted the same way as Biden, as a dictatorship of the capitalist class over the workers. So Trump going to Ohio here is obviously just a PR move to boost his campaign, right? But there are so many people who are digging their heels in and defending Biden because of this. Because Trump's doing a PR move, they're like, yeah, it's okay that Biden's in Ukraine, or Biden's doing the right thing because Trump is doing the wrong thing. No, the only reason that Trump was able to turn this situation into a PR move is because Biden is such a tool, such a puppet of the capitalist class, such a puppet of his shareholders and donors. If Biden was in Ohio right now handing out aid like he should be as the president of the United States, Trump wouldn't be able to do this, and Biden would. That's not what Biden's doing. He's carrying a bag of cash created by the working mass of his home country to hand to the war effort in Ukraine, to hand to the NATO proxy war against Russia, which is the main priority of the U.S. government, even though their working people are suffering. Right. So I responded to this tweet from LOL Overruled, who is someone really cool I met from TikTok. They're like a public defense lawyer and a socialist, but absolutely unforced error on the Dems, effing morons. Like I said, they're morons. They allowed Trump to have this PR victory, this media victory. And I said Dems can no longer hide their disdain for the regular working people. Right? It's obvious to everyone now. It's obvious not only to people in Ohio, not only to rail workers, but to everyone, because this has become national news. And everyone sees that Biden's in Ukraine while this is going on in Ohio. And you know, Trump just drew attention to it, which honestly is a good thing that Trump did. The fact that he drew attention to Biden being in Ukraine rather than in Ohio, you know, yeah, I get that Trump's doing it as a PR move, but it opened a lot of working class people's eyes to what Biden is doing. So this person, old Layla Donovan, anonymous account, says working people, 70% of this community lives on SNAP benefits and welfare, which there are a lot of working people who need SNAP benefits and welfare. Right? Just because you're on SNAP doesn't mean that you just sit around all day collecting government checks. Right? The rail companies don't pay a lot of workers enough to survive. They don't pay a lot of workers enough to feed their kids and pay for rent, so they have to go on welfare benefits. Right? But when the Republicans go and hand out aid to this area where people are suffering, the Democrats are saying these aren't even working people, they're on SNAP. Like, what is going on? How far right can the Democrats go? How evil and disdainful towards the working people, the working masses of this country, can the Democrats possibly be? I mean, this tweet is truly insane. Guess which company is actively working to cut those benefits? Or guess which company? It ain't the Dems. Meanwhile, that's not true. That's not true. Biden made it illegal for the rail workers to go on strike, which had to do with demanding benefits that were being cut while the companies were making millions and millions and millions of dollars. This has all gone on under Biden's nose, as have the series of crises and train derailments, including the one in East Palestine that poisoned a bunch of people. It's all happened under Biden. Meanwhile, the guy in the rail company paid to roll back safety guidelines and brought them Big Macs. Yeah, Trump deregulated the economy. Guess what? I'm not a Trump supporter. Whoa. I know this is really hard for people like this to understand. I don't like either of them. They both represent a dictatorship of the capitalist class and disdain for working people. When I say the Dems can no longer hide their disdain for regular working people, I'm not saying that Trump loves regular working people or he is a regular working person. No, I'm saying the Dems are so bad and so disdainful towards the workers that Donald Trump, the real estate oligarch, can appear as more pro-working class than Biden and the Democrats, who are absolutely useless and treat the working masses of their own country like they're just annoying rabble who aren't worth their time, when compared to the Ukrainian people waging a proxy war for them against Russia, at least. I quote tweeted this, and go like this quote tweet, because this person needs to know how dumb what they just said was. But I say that the Dems can't hide their disdain for working people, and your response is to say that these aren't real working people because they receive SNAP benefits. Thank you for proving my point, Layla. Thank you for proving my point that Democrats hate workers. The Democrats do not give a shit about the working mass. And they'll defend anything the Democrats do, no matter how horrific, how imperialistic, and how anti-worker it is. Thank you. Also, I'm not a Trump supporter. I just wish our president cared more about Ohio than Kiev, Ukraine. That's how liberalism rots people's brains. That's it right there. I think Joe Biden, instead of sending a bunch of money and weapons to wage a proxy war against another country, should use those resources to help the people of our own country who are right now poisoned because of his policies. And you're like, well, how could you support Trump? How could you support Trump? The Democrats are awesome. Pull your head out of your ass. I don't even know why I say that to liberals, because they're not going to. But yeah, that's the state of Democrats and liberalism right now. There it is. So yeah, here, by the way, is our endorsement of the rail workers. Moving on to better things, more important things than absurd Democrats on Twitter defending using all of our tax dollars on a proxy war instead of making people's lives better. I just sent the link. Actually, I think Carlos might have sent the link already for me. Thank you, Carlos. But here it is. The Midwestern Marx Institute wholeheartedly endorses the Rail Workers United resolution in support of public ownership and control of rail. So you can read it if you want. I'm not going to read the whole thing right now just because it's quite long. This was put together by our editorial board and approved by all of us. Me, Carlos, Thomas Riggins, Noah Kratchvik. Noah, I'm never going to learn how to say your last name. Sorry. Mitchell Jones, Colin Winchell. Everybody who's a part of our core editorial staff at Midwestern Marx was part of this endorsement. Like I said, it was for the railroad workers, which is so cool. Such a step in the right direction that, a Marxist pro-working class, pro-labor educational outlet, revolutionary educational outlet, is forging a relationship with the actual rail unions, right? To the point where they'd ask us for an endorsement is huge, and a sign of the times in the U.S., a sign of the that the level of class struggle is increasing greatly. But yeah, we're really excited about that. Although this situation is very sad, we know that sometimes the contradictions of capitalism have to intensify, have to get worse, which, unfortunately makes working people's lives worse in many cases like this, for working people to realize that we need a new system. Right, we need a system that takes every last dollar that was sent towards proxy war in Ukraine, and destroying Russia and Ukraine, and overthrowing Ukraine's government in 2014 in order to create this proxy war. Every last dollar that was spent on that should be reinvested in the working people of our own country, right? Because capitalism is a society that works by and for the capitalist class. Right, the capitalist class wants to take out Russia because they're threatening their global dominance. The U.S. government sends all their money and resources towards proxy war against Russia. Right, capitalism is a society for capital with a government that works as a dictatorship of the capitalists. Socialism changes that society and turns it into a society that works by and for itself, by and for the working masses. So like I said, every single dollar that's spent on weapons in Ukraine and aiding the capitalist class proxy war should be reinvested in improving our society itself, improving people's day-to-day lives, increasing the amount of free time that people have, increasing safety regulations, improving our infrastructure, which is clearly crumbling, as we saw by the story today. Not only in terms of like our pipes and our water supplies, and you have famous stories like Flint, Michigan, of course, but also with rail, right? Also with the roads, with every aspect of our infrastructure, we're getting destroyed by China, for one, who does operate as a society by and for itself, a socialist society instead of a capitalist society. Yeah, I guess that's all. We're getting crushed by China. They're showing us an example of what reinvesting your country's surplus in your country could do. And instead, we choose day after day after day, or our government chooses day after day after day to use the country's surplus to hand out giant sums of money to shareholders and wage murderous proxy wars for their market interests abroad. And that's not going to change, until workers get organized enough, struggle enough to where we can make demands of the government and eventually to the point where we can have a revolutionary movement that seizes the government, turns it into a socialist society, a society buying for itself, or a government buying for society, not one for the capitalist ruling class. Solidarity today and tomorrow, at home and abroad. Absolutely. At home and abroad. That's a good way to put it. One of the things I like, not one of the things I like, but one of the more interesting things about this issue is that it shows the connection between imperialism and capitalism. I should have grabbed Lenin's Imperialism before I started the segment. But it so clearly shows that imperialism is not just an action, right? Imperialism isn't only the proxy war in Ukraine, isolated from all other factors. Imperialism is a stage of capitalism. It is the highest stage of capitalism. So the fact that Joe Biden's in Kiev, Ukraine right now, while there's a crisis in East Palestine, Ohio, are directly related, directly interrelated, right? The shareholders and corporations that allowed the rails to deteriorate are the same ones who want to wage a proxy war for their global market and geopolitical dominance. Right? So the reason Biden is spending all our resources on war, all the resources Biden's spending on war, all that he's spending on imperialism could be spent on building up our country. But instead, we put more and more and more and more of our resources towards imperialism and violence and controlling markets abroad, and less money on our own infrastructure and on our own people, which creates what Lenin calls in chapter 6 or something, the decay of imperialism, right? Because capitalism, once it hits its imperialist stage, once the capitalists go abroad and start trying to conquer foreign markets, they're spending all their resources and all the labor of that society on these imperialist wars abroad instead of at home. So at home, things start to decay. And that is exactly what we're seeing right now. And Biden being in Kiev, Ukraine, while people are being poisoned from the train derailment, really shows people, helps tie together for people the connection between imperialism and capitalism. Imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism. It is the global economic system we live in. It is a system of imperialism, especially if you live in the West. So, yeah, the collapse of imperialism will go hand in hand with the collapse of capitalism. And the only way to actually take down imperialism is through class struggle. You know, we had our various opinions on the anti-war rally, right? The what was it called? Rage Against the War Machine, right? We thought that Marxists and socialists should have gone to that rally, but we said they should have gone to that rally to talk about class struggle, right? They should have gone to that rally to be like, we can have as many rallies as we want, and these are great, right? And we can have as many journalists exposing these things as we want, and that's great. But until we get the working class at the base of society, until we get like the rail workers and all the workers in the important industries to realize this, to realize imperialism is a stage of capitalism itself, that the terrible working conditions of the workers are deeply connected to the proxy war being waged in Ukraine, until you can help people realize that and build up material forms of working class organization, we're not actually going to be able to stop the wars, right? You can't stop imperialism without stopping capitalism. You can't stop capitalism without stopping class struggle. Therefore, the only way to defeat imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, is through class struggle. So this helps us make that point, helps people see that point, and it's an important point for Marxists to be making. Hey, everybody. Hey, Where Pilgrim. Good to see you. Showing my solidarity. If disasters like this keep happening, I wonder if people will get more violent. Thank you so much, Sparks. Really, really appreciate the $5 super chat there. Thank you for supporting our project. You can also become a member to our YouTube channel if you want. Some people were doing that earlier. It's basically like being a Twitch subscriber, where you get like emotes and certain benefits. If you're a $10 Twitch member, you'll get a Journal of American Socialist Studies ebook. But either ways, showing my solidarity. Wonder if people will get more violent. Well, people will get more angry. People will be more displeased. People will be more militant. People will be more discontented with the government. Does that lead? It often does lead to violence. The deterioration of the working class's conditions often does lead to violence. It leads, disaffected people, to fall into violent right-wing movements and right-wing militias and groups, as well as, causing the working class to become more militant in a left-wing way, right? In an organized and strategic way, which is what we want, right? We don't just want violence. The working class needs to be prepared to defend itself from the arms of the capitalist class that are going to try and crush it. But the goal is to not have people's rage and discontent just come out as blind violence, right? Senseless violence. We need to organize. Worker combinations, like working class political parties, unions, the workplaces. Get workers combined into groups where they can struggle together. Get them educated on the structure of the system, so that they can wage a strategic struggle in favor of their own interests and for socialism, which is their own interest. Not just blind violence, but yes, discontent, worker discontent and militancy will absolutely increase from this. So thank you for the solidarity and for the super chat. Appreciate that. Marxist Saw, how's it going, Marxist Saw? Great to talk to you. One of our absolute favorites in the chat here and in the Midwestern Marx Discord. But it says the people have to be made more class conscious so the corporate psyop can't continue to mislead them in circles about their inevitable antagonism they have with the capitalist class. Absolutely. And this is a much better and much more detailed way of saying what I was saying when I said we need to stay focused, right? We need to stay focused on the class struggle here when it comes to this issue, in the anti-imperialist struggle, rather than get distracted by the partisan hackery, the American political circus, the battle between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, right? Donald Trump is not equivalent to class struggle, right? If Donald Trump gets in office, like I said, it's highly, 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 highly unlikely that he nationalizes rail. And even though Trump going to the site of the derailment, even him going to Ohio, even though that exposed Biden and showed the fact that Biden is in Kiev, Ukraine, when he should be in Ohio, and that was a good thing that resulted from Trump. The bad thing that results from it is there's a lot of people who think Trump is the answer, right? There's a lot of people who are like, yeah, this is why we should vote Republican instead of voting Democrat. No. This is why we should organize ourselves, right? The working class, the class struggle needs leadership for sure. It's always going to need leadership, but it needs leadership from within its own ranks, right? It needs working class leadership. It doesn't need leadership. It doesn't need some benevolent member of the capitalist class to go into office or get the presidency and fix everything for us. It's not even possible. So we need to keep people focused on the class struggle and draw their attention away from this partisan hackery that's bound to go on in the political circus. Because bourgeois democracy, the liberal political system, is very good at distracting us from class struggle. Some would say that's their entire purpose.